are the best Yu-Gi-Oh decks right now. Ironically, Battles of Legends Terminal Revenge has made some huge changes, and today, alongside of a sizable meta shift, we're going to be talking about the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And what would give you the best chance at winning Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Alright, big dog, so the criteria for this tier list is real simple, my friend. I'm going to be ranking these Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies based on how powerful they are and giving you an idea on, if you take this deck, what would be the strengths and weaknesses of these strategies. Of course, Battles of Legends Terminal Revenge did shake some things up, and we do have another set in Infinite Forbidden coming out. So I'll even be giving you some remarks on what do I think these strategies will do when Infinite Forbidden comes out, but this tier list is for the right now. And of course, big dog, as per usual, if you guys think that I missed a strategy, go ahead and let me know down below in the comment section. I will try to reply to as many people as possible, but if I can't, I will try my best to get your strategy into the next tier list. Without further ado, let's address that tier 0 problem. Currently right now, even with Battles of Legends Terminal Revenge, and if we don't receive a ban list in Infinite Forbidden, we're in a tier 0 format. This means that Snake Eyes is the best deck available if you just want to win. And the biggest reason why is because Snake Eyes really doesn't have a counter. I remember once upon a time, players thought that Dimension Shifter shuts this deck down. It really doesn't. And no matter how many board breakers or hand traps that you play, if you can't establish a presence that Snake Eyes can't break, then you will lose in the long run. I am praying to my almighty Ra that a ban list drops incredibly soon to be able to fix that problem, but I would say that Snake Eyes is the best deck in the room. If I had to give it an order, I still think that Pure is the best, Snake Eyes Kashtira would be second best, and Snake Eyes Fire King has actually gained my respect. And the reason why is because Snake Eyes Fire King does something really well that the other versions don't do incredibly well, which is play around board breakers like Dark Ruler No More, which has been seeing a lot of play. I'm just saying, big dog, frying that big chicken on your side of the field be doing things, and because this deck does have a lot of graveyard resiliency, it allows you to be able to play against a ton of board breakers. Consider that when you're building this deck, if you think your opponents are going to be on cards like Evenly Matched in Dark Ruler No More. Because I'm telling you, those cards be cooking right now. But with that out of the way, every single one of these strategies has to be able to address the Fire King or Snake Eyes Kashtira matchup, and as well be able to compete against some of the top competitors. Let's start off with Pearly. Pearly is incredibly good. It got top 4 at the Oceania Nationals, which I do want to say, a Nationals is the highest stage before Worlds. None of these dudes that are playing in this event are bums. They have at the very least gotten an invite. I think Pearly's success hinges on how good the player is, but if we take that out of the equation, this is a deck that has proven itself to be one of the top competitors over time. I think one of the best ways to approach Pearly right now is a board breaker approach. When you're going first, you can discard it with your Pearly cards, and X-Pearly Noir is a legitimate win condition. The card is crazy. I also like that Pearly can combat Fire King and Snake Eyes and other decks alike by simply attaching those monsters that your opponent needs into the graveyard as material to your monsters. It's really, really good how this deck approaches being able to go against other strategies. Centurion. Oh, Centurion. On one side of the coin for Centurion, you have Hot Red Dragon, Archfiend, King Calamity of Destruction. Yeah, whoever made that name definitely was 12. On the other side, Centurion is a more mundane deck. It has one-card combos and multiple ways to get into that one-card combo, but its biggest problem is infinite impermanence and effect valence, something that's still being played to this day. I think that there's some potential with Centurion. Keep in mind, this deck does get stronger with Infinite Forbidden in the White Woods Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but as far as taking this deck to the highest level events, I don't think it's happening right now. Solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck, it's just not its time. But Fluundereeze, big dog, the bird's always the word. It's really interesting because throughout the last 2 formats, Fluundereeze was considered one of the top budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks. But nowadays, I think there's some potential. Fluundereeze is no longer the best dimensional shifter deck. That's already strike number 1. Fluundereeze Impin is also incredibly easy to play around with because a lot of the top decks don't just link summon. They have Synchro, Fusion, and even Xseed summons too. So that's technically strike number 2. I do think that since board breakers are coming into the format, Fluundereeze being able to triple tactics thrust into cards like Dark Ruler No More and Evenly Matched is still really good, but also being able to triple tactics thrust into Harpy's Featherstorm is a complete blowout. It gives hope that some of the most hated players in the game can continue to be hated. And that's something that we can all unite against. Voiceless Voice. Voiceless Voice fell off harder than season 7 of Rick and Morty. Seriously, think about it. Voiceless Voice had the potential to be something like Futurama, a really good show that actually progresses a story and gives us hope, love, torment, and everything else in between. Only to find out that it's like Family Guy. I mean, I guess it's watchable, just like how Voiceless Voice is playable. This deck can compete. Now, I know I gave it the most harshest, scathing criticism, but I am incredibly disappointed with Voiceless Voice. It was a strategy that I thought would be a top competitor, but anytime that you look at any top regional bracket or above, it's always at the bottom rung of it. It's a deck that'll get you there, but not enough. Ask your girlfriend how that feels. She'll tell you an exact. Kashtira. Oh my God. Kashtira was the last strategy that I have topped with in my regional events, and I have some really harsh critique from this deck. I think that Kashtira is amazing in Master Duel. Kashtira Riceheart is banned in the TCG, and that gives it a significant disadvantage, seeing that its best boss monster is banned. But I think one of the biggest problems with Kashtira is that it never fixed that consistency issue. You combine a wildly inconsistent deck with hand traps not being enough to stop some of the top decks in the game, on top of Kashtira not being a strategy that has been known to push for game in consistent times. I would say that this deck has a myriad of problems. Right now, the Kashtira cards are better off in other Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, and it just feels bad. Plus, who the hell wants to be Exceed locked? Come on now. Fair cards on unfair cards. Come on, pick a side, Konami. Do you want to make the deck unfair or fair? Fenrir, Birth, and Unicorn are busted cards, but Theosis is disappointing. Kind of like how Labyrinth has been in a slump. No, guys, I'm not talking about Lady Lab's booty. I'm talking about the genuine slump that this strategy has been in. Since taking second at some of the most prestigious events, Labyrinth has been almost non-existent, and I have a good reason why. Labyrinth actually reminds me of Branded. It's a deck that pops up, shows out, and disappears. It's mainly because this deck is really strong when no one's expecting it, but when people are expecting it, it gets worse. Kind of reminds me of the cool uncle at the party. Like, he's really, really cool until you realize that he doesn't have a life. I'm gonna put it in can compete. Hey, that drunk uncle be coming with crazy ideas. You remember the multi-simultaneous math version of the deck? The nib your opponent but activate a Labyrinth furniture so they don't get a monster? Bro, you be cooking. And then you realize that people catch on. Runic Stun. I can tell you I do not condone or approve of a Runic Stun player. TJ, I do not condone or approve of you. But if you are looking to top an event and not win an event, it can compete. I find Runic Stun incredibly interesting because in a realm where there are hyper-competitive players, they normally don't play cards to stop Runic Stun. But in a more casual setting, like regionals or so, players are always playing backer removal because they think it's mandatory, which ironically makes this deck worse. It's the non-elite Yu-Gi-Oh players that keep this from being one of the most dominant decks in the game, and fortunately enough, there are always way more non-elite players than elite. But hey, sometimes you need a ticket for the dance. You don't always need to be the guy at the dance, right? Right? Or are we kidding? We're never going to be the guy at the dance. Branded. Ironically, with Branded, I said it was just like Labyrinth. So it's almost a no-brainer, even though it did get second place at the last Nationals, that it's a strategy that can compete. Another good Yu-Gi-Oh strategy that gets you to the dance. I think the biggest problem with Branded, unlike some of the other strategies on this tier list, is that it requires a big brain to play. And how I know is because I gave the deck to TJ and we watched him play it for a couple of weeks. You could not be more disappointed. At least Branded players can say that their deck is not brain dead, and it's still one of the more competitive strategies in the game. I think Can Compete is an appropriate response to this deck because it does seem like a strategy that can make a deep run with the correct player, but for your average, regular Yu-Gi-Oh player, it's a strategy that just can compete. Solomon Great. Come on, guys, you already know. Solomon Great's tier 0, and I'm not coping here. Solomon Great is tier 0 because, okay, all right. You got me. Solomon Great really is a good Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, though. Do not get it twisted. I understand that there's an FTK version, which is just souped up Snake Eyes, but the Solomon Great regular version of the deck is a fairly consistent deck. The only problem is that it's somewhat hand trap reliant. And as you guys already know, the top competitors and above are somewhat immune to hand traps. It doesn't really work as effective. But if this deck can consistently go first, oh my God, big problems. They have a solemn judgment on search. They even got a pop 4. It's 4 cards, you lose it. almost like there's another deck that has that, and it's really, really good. We'll talk about that later. I also think that Chimera is another strategy that there's a lot of potential with this. Chimera is similar to Solomon Great. Multiple 1-card play lines, a lot of 2-card play lines, and can play a ton of hand traps. The problem is that hand traps don't do enough at this point in time unless you're killing them on the crackback, or you got some insanely busted combo, something that these two decks both lack. I will say one thing about Chimera though. If you playing hand traps, you can hand rip your opponent, and that's cool. Now, Melodious is really weird to me. And the reason why Melodious seems really weird is because it feels kind of like Voiceless Voice. It's a deck that shows up, competes, tops, but sometimes. But I think that there's more instances where Melodious actually does damage. And it's also a strategy that is really, really good against hand traps. Its weakness, board breakers, which players are playing a little bit more. But even if you do get board broken, you still got 3 to 4 hand traps yourself to slow your opponent down and continue on your 1-card combo. I think right now Melodious can argue a spot for top competitor, but I'm gonna put it in can compete. The deck can make some waves like my ex-girlfriend on a waterbed because, you know, she's easy at making that, but also a lot of times can fall short of its intended goal, which I hope is to win. Lightsworn, how does this deck still do things? I swear, every single time that I play against a Lightsworn player, it gives me PTSD. And I think it's mainly because top deck TJ has instilled that he can mill triple wolf at any given time, but now since the deck plays 6 wolves and other outliers, I think it's a good deck. But the problem? It got some problems. Lightsworn is a good board-breaking Yu-Gi-Oh deck. I would suggest playing it with board break. The problem? Getting into those board breakers. Also, Lightsworn is one of the very few decks that needs to be able to win down on a turn, so cards like Dark Ruler No More feel really awkward when you have to break your opponent's board and make a board that could probably be broken with some of the top meta decks. I love that Lightsworn is a lot more powerful though. Tenpai Dragon, post Infinite Forbidden, guys, and maybe even a ban list, Tenpai Dragon may be in the top status and we might not have a tier 0 format. But for right now, I think it's one of the decks that can compete. One of the biggest things about Tenpai is that you can play those board breaker cards or hand traps. But the best thing about it is that once you play those cards, you then OTK your opponent. You finish off the job, because going against Snake Eyes and allowing them to live another turn is almost certain doom. Tenpai Dragon fixes that problem. Same thing can also be said about Yubel. And what I like about Yubel is that it doesn't need to break your board. It just needs to put yourself in a situation where you can't activate any more effects. From there, Nightmare Pain and Yubel monsters pretty much do the job. Now with Phantom of Yubel, the deck is even crazier too. Gives it a lot more pliability against hand traps and is just an outrageous deck. I think this is also one of the top competitor Yu-Gi-Oh decks, easy. And the best thing about it is, just like Tenpai Dragon, this strategy does get more support in Infinite Forbidden. I think we are moving closer towards Fiend decks getting so much support, it just kind of makes a monster mash collaboration of Fiend cards, kind of like what Dragon Link does and what plants do. Yeah, I ain't gonna lie, we're gonna skip over tier limits real quick and we're gonna talk about plants. Top competitor. There's an ongoing joke that plants are only good in Europe, but I think that's simply because Europeans actually read their cards. I could be giving them too much credit. Chat, which European country doesn't read their cards? Let me know. The reason why I put plants so high is because of the conversion rate. We know for a fact that there are not a lot of plant players at given events, but consistently for the last month or so, they have been topping, getting first, second place, even winning major events. Winning second place, same thing at this point in time in Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, because it's tier 0, we expect Snake Eyes to be first. So the second place is really the first place, right? I'm coping. But hopefully I planted the seeds to tell you about this strategy. It's really good at being able to escape hand interruptions and building a board on its own. And also, since board breakers are a little bit more popular, it has ways to play around it with its powerful spell and trap cards, but also can incorporate those board breaker cards to help you break boards fairly easy as well. It's a perfect balance of a Yu-Gi-Oh deck, just hard to understand. Tier limits. I'm not saying you got like a fetish or anything if you still playing tier limits in 2024, but get help. Tier limit does have a couple of things going for it. One of my favorite things is that it can make Totally Awesome, and because of tier limit Rukalos, your opponent can't attack over the Totally Awesome because it can't be destroyed by battle. But the biggest problem with tier limit is almost the same as Lightsworn. It can be mad inconsistent, and getting into your board breakers or hand traps, depending on what you play, is also really hard. I think once players fix that problem though, this deck is really formidable. Sprite. This is really tough because I talked about this strategy in what I think are going to be the best decks in the game. I think that Sprite does have the opportunities to be one of the better decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! But I think that's all based solely on potential. Make no mistake, big dog, Sprite did win a Nationals, which is huge. But I think we're gonna need to see a little bit more consistency out of the deck in order for us to make it a can compete or a top competitor. If you guys don't think that Ritual Beast isn't a top competitor Yu-Gi-Oh deck, I have some oceanfront property in Kansas to sell you. Ritual Beast does everything you want into an anti-Yu-Gi-Oh deck against the tier 0. It plays Shifter, but that's not the only thing it can do, because as we know, Shifter isn't enough. It can summon Thunder Dragon Colossus. That's actually huge. But as we know, that's still not enough. It can also summon Arch Nemesis Protos and destroy fire monsters on the field, preventing fires from being summoned. Now, by themselves, that does not seem like enough, but together, and it does it consistently, Ritual Beast is a really good strategy. Do not be surprised once players start to pick up this deck more and learn more about it that it doesn't make consistent deep runs. This strategy is incredibly good right now. Now, as for pure ice barriers, what you guys expect, it's ice barriers, guys. I know there were a lot of people hype about this deck, but the reality of the situation is that any hand trap sets it down. The same could be said about Gen X. You guys were hyped for these Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, but literally, a Skullmeister shuts the deck's combos down. And all you need is one. Okay, maybe not a Skullmeister, but every popular hand trap definitely shuts the deck. Shining Sarcophagus did get one more card, but I think the most important card for Shining Sarcophagus is Infinite Forbidden. This deck has so much potential, I promise you guys. I am not coping on this Yu-Gi-Oh strategy. When the new card comes out, the Ebon Magician, it gives it a going first board. The deck already is really good at going second, board breaking, and OTKing. In other words, you really gonna have to watch out for Shining Sarcophagus, my folks. This deck is actually pretty decent and is only getting stronger. Now, as for Red Dragon Archfiend, guys, I apologize. I was not expecting Flame Crime King to go up in price. But here we are, me giving you guys that apology because this deck is pretty dang good. As the master of faster, the king of disaster, Black Atlanta, Jack Atlanta, I am here to tell you that on a meta scale, this deck has a ton of potential. Never once did I say that this deck was a top tier Yu-Gi-Oh deck. No. But what I did say is that it has a very strong foundation to be able to compete with some of the best decks. You can play a ton of hand traps, you can end the game incredibly quickly, and you can also play around hand traps. I think the only thing that's stopping Red Dragon Archfiend from being higher on this tier list is that personally, I want to take my bias out of it, so I want to see some results. I'm relying on you guys to make Black Atlas proud. I think even with Engage at 3, there's some pretty big problems with Sky Striker. One of the biggest ones is that Konami screwed us over and didn't give us the new Sky Striker cards. Once we get Sky Striker Ace Camellia, and that will send Engage from the deck to the graveyard without having the battle, I think there's a lot of things that change for this deck, but for right now, it needs more support. It's power craft. And Infernoid, oh my god, there's a ton of promise. I'm sorry guys, I went down a dark route when I said Infernoid was crazy good. It's not. I don't even think that this deck goes high on my rogue tier list. It's a wildly not strong deck. It got some really good things going for it, and I hope that there's some players that prove me wrong, because I really do like Inferno. But as it stands right now, I would not even expect this deck to top a regional. It just doesn't have what it takes. The power, the consistency, the interruptions, pretty much anything. I'm sorry, boss. I know you wanted me to tell people how strong Decatron is. It is incredibly strong, but unfortunately, it's tied to Inferno. And that's all that I have for my best decks tier list. Of course, if you guys have any disagreements, can't wait to see what you have to say. And again, if you think that I should put a particular strategy on for the next tier list or talk about it, go ahead and let me know down below. I hope you guys are having an amazing day, and I'll catch you on the next video.